We all suffer losses in our lives. Sometimes we lose a loved one. Sometimes we lose something that we love. Marcy told me that her dog passed away. And my goodness, I've been through that one too. And that's painful as well when that happens. So I'm sorry and for all of the losses that we have had this week. And I hope that we can maybe get a lesson, something positive out of it. The fact is that life is very short, isn't it? And before you know it, you're not there anymore. And I think that's the reason why we should live our lives the right way. Because life is short. It's gonna just pass away very quickly. And that's the reason for us to be who we are, who we really deep down inside are. And a lot of people are living a lie of who they are, and they are being somebody else than what God made them to be. God made you to be you. God made you to be yourself. The Bible tells us that God made us in His image, and He made Adam to be Adam. And He made Eve to be Eve. And He made Jesus. He sent Jesus to do His part here on this world. He made each person in the Bible to be themselves. Apostle Peter was Apostle Peter. He was not supposed to be Apostle Paul. He was supposed to be Peter. And you and I, we are supposed to be who we are. And I think that's important in this whole study of stress. I think when we are not true to ourselves, to who we really are, that's something that causes a lot of stress in our lives. I'm just going to read a few quotes to you today to open up. It is the chiefest point of happiness that a man is willing to be what he is. That's Erasmus. Next one. It takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. Sometimes we become who our Father wanted us to become. Sometimes we become who our teacher or a pastor or somebody else in authority wanted us to become. It takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. Be yourself. Above all, let who you are, what you believe, shine through every sentence you write, every piece you finish. He who travels in search of something which he has not got travels away from himself and grows old, even in youth, among old things. That's Emerson. A wise man never loses anything if he has himself. All of these are about being who you are. Now, I like this one, the next one. Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions. Their lives, a mimicry. Their passions, a quotation. Oscar Wilde. Hateful to me as the gates of Hades is the man who hides one thing in his heart and speaks another. Homer. Learn to be what you are, and learn to resign with a good grace all that you are not. When we don't learn that, when we are trying to be something that we are not, when we are living a lie, when we are living in a relationship that's not working, when we are doing a job that we don't like, but yet we keep pushing, when we are not what we are, that's what causes stress. And then you're living in this perpetual state of stress. Almost all absurdity of conduct arises from the imitation of those whom we cannot resemble. And how about this one? And I'll leave it to this last one. If God had wanted me otherwise, He would have created me otherwise. So, my simple point for this message, for this sermon today, is that when we are living a lie, stress comes into our life. Now, there are a lot of people out here who could talk more proficiently about stress and scientifically, but I'm just going to go through it in a simple way so that everybody can understand it. And in the way that I understand it, what is stress? Stress is the body's primitive automatic response to danger. You heard that, right? Stress is our automatic response to danger. You're driving down the road and all of a sudden somebody starts yelling at you from another car. What do? Your response is what? You yell back at them? Who said no? I think I saw you the other day on the road there. And I think you slammed your brakes. No, you see, you do have to behave in traffic because you never know who's going to see you. And as a matter of fact, I did see Marina last summer drive, and she was behaving she was driving very nice. But, we see each other. Oh, you start laughing? That's good. So that's a good response. That's a good response. Now, not everybody responds that way. When we feel threatened, right? Ready to fight. Or if the threat is too big, like when I saw a bear in the mountains, trust me, I wasn't going to fight him. I turned around and I remembered all of the advice from all of the people who said, don't run when you see a bear. And I just took off running. Because you see that big animal up there, and he was like, 20 feet away, just standing there looking at me. And I just turned around and went slow first and then faster and faster and faster. And pretty soon I was going faster than anybody on the Olympics team, So you either fight or you run away, right? That's what stress does to us. And it's a good thing. Because sometimes you see a major danger and you want to get away from it. You don't want to be there. I was in the old country not too long after the war ended. And there was something going on in the city. I was supposed to go into one of the government buildings. And there was a demonstration over there in front of the building. And people were I was in line waiting. And all of a sudden, I tell you, without any warning, the whole scene turned into a chaos. And people were pushing each other and hitting each other, and all of a sudden I saw that police was going to come out, and my only response at that point was to get away from that situation. Because you could either be trampled to death or shot or killed or clubbed over the head, So at that point, your stress comes in and your hormones and everything in your body tells you, get the heck out of here. And that's what I did. And we react like that in any situation. That's what stress does. Stress is the automatic response to danger. The brain sees the danger and the body responds by going into a state of hyper-alertness. This is called the fight or flight response. The body is flooded with stress hormones which give us extra strength and energy to deal with the enemy. Did I ever tell you a story? When I was preaching in Wyoming, I was coming back one night from Denver. I think we had some kind of pastors' meetings, and it was a huge snowstorm on Highway 287 over there as I crossed the Colorado border up into Wyoming. I mean, you couldn't see nothing ahead of you, and there was a truck ahead of me, not the semi-truck, but one of those regular trucks, and I was kind of following him, and all of a sudden his lights disappeared. And as I drove another minute, I saw that the truck was on its side. It flipped over. And I stopped. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning, night, dark as could be, and just snow falling and wind howling, and I was the first one, and nobody else on the highway. And I came out and I walked over there, and this thing was off of the road there, maybe another 100 yards. I don't even know how he got there. When I got there, that truck was upside down. And I looked around and I saw that gasoline was dripping. And there was a man lying under the truck didn't squash him, but it was just on top of him. I mean, if it went another 4 inches, it would have just killed him, you know. And the guy was unconscious. And he was a normal-sized person, you know, maybe 160, 170 pounds. And I tell you what happened. I reached out for him because I saw that gas dripping. I reached out for him with one hand, and I pulled him out, and he felt as light as a feather to me. It didn't feel like I was pulling a 200-pound man. It felt like I was pulling a nothing. You know what I mean? And what has happened at that moment, I realized later that my adrenaline got so high, you know, I just didn't feel anything. I did not feel any exertion. I mean, my strength probably quadrupled. And I pulled him out like he was nothing, you know, out of that area. And pretty soon, state troopers came by, and I read the following morning that the man actually survived. He was put in a hospital in Laramie, and he actually survived. But that's what stress does. And I heard these stories of people who find themselves in these situations where all of a sudden they have this superhuman strength because of the stress. And I experienced it that one time in my life. So stress is a good thing. Now, there are times when too much stress is not a good thing, right? If you're living with this chronic stress that I talked about in the beginning, when you're not being true to yourself, but you stay with it. I had a deaconess come up to me one time years ago and said, my husband's cheating on me. And I said, well, why don't you leave him? You know, and she said, well, I don't know where I would go. And she says, this is just killing me. This was stressing her out. She was living with somebody who was not being faithful to her, and it was tremendously stressing her out, yet she wasn't willing to do anything about it because the alternative to her at that time seemed to be worse. So sometimes we live in this chronic stress situation where we are not being true to ourselves. Had she been true to her own feelings of, I need to respect myself for who I am, I'm not going to be in this situation where somebody's abusing me, she would have been out of there. And how many of us have experienced similar situation where we are not being true to ourselves, we are putting up with something that we really shouldn't be putting up with. And it's causing you chronic stress. Symptoms of stress, I'm just going to go quickly through these. I got that off the internet. This is not something that I took a class on or anything like that. Tendency to gain fat around the middle. So just take a second and touch yourself right here. Okay, if you got more than 2 inches, then that could be a sign of something stressful. An increased appetite. How many of you are hungry right now? Anybody? Yeah, you feel like eating something good? Okay. How about this one? Increased cravings for chocolate, sweets, and bread. Man, I get that sometimes. I get that. I tell you, I get so frustrated with things that are going on in the church, and I hear you. I'm supposed to do the radio program and the TV program, and somebody's calling me that the person is sick at the hospital, and somebody else wants to come and see me, and all of a sudden I just need a bagel. You know what I mean? And it's just something in your body that this stress causes, this reaction where you need food, you need chocolate, you need sweets, you need sugar, cakes, caffeine. Some people go with alcohol. I had a friend who, if he did not get his beer, man, I tell you, he couldn't function. He was just so stressed all the time and so wound up, and then he get that beer, and how about the cigarette? You've seen that? You've seen these people who are they're climbing on top of the wall, they want to kill everybody. And then they put the cigarette in their mouth and they're, feels so good, There are some people I almost want to buy them a pack of cigarettes just so they would calm down. How about this one? A loss of energy in the middle of the afternoon. Anybody? These are all signs of stress. Low immune system, headaches. The next one is nail biting. Next time, when I shake your hand, I'm going to look at your nails. Teeth grinding, nauseousness, shaking, sweating, dizziness, high cholesterol, sugar swings, digestive problems, irritable bowel syndrome, chest pains, muscle aches and pains. We're just going through these quickly. How about this next set? This next set is kind of telling too. Anger, impatience, burnout. How many people just get angry? A little thing throws them off. Something that shouldn't throw you off if you're a normal, if you're a balanced, if you're a healthy person. And then all of a sudden, this little thing, somebody says a word or looks at you. I got to confess, I went to Panera Bread not too long ago. And I'm standing in line, and I come up, it's my turn, and I order, and I give her my credit card, and she looks at my credit card, she looks at me, she looks at my credit card, and she says, "Do you have an ID?" A little thing, right? Just a little thing. And I say, "Of course I have an ID." I'm already on edge, And of course I have an ID. I said, "Do you think I give you somebody else's credit card?" She says, "No, I have to ask." "I'm sorry," she says, we just have to ask. So I'm angry at this time because she asked me for an ID. So I take my thing and I stand over here like this. And I'm looking at her. I want to see what's going to happen next. I want to see if she's going to ask the next person for an ID. And guess what happens? She doesn't realize that I'm doing this. She just goes about her business. Next person comes up, gives her credit card. She just runs it, never asks for an ID. Another person comes up. She just runs it, never asks for an ID. So finally I had enough, and I go over there and I say, "I thought you said you have to ask for an ID." I said, "Do I look that dishonest to you that you had to ask me for an ID?" And at that point, when I said it, I realized I was going overboard. So I said, "Okay, I'm going to calm down." And I walked away. But sometimes a little thing like that can just throw you off, right? Because you have stress all day long, things are going on, and then somebody does a little thing that under normal circumstances means nothing. So what? So she asked for an ID. That's part of her job. She saw me and maybe things didn't fit, and she asked. So she has the right to do that. I shouldn't be mad about it. But yet I was. And we all have been there. We all have done that. We get mad like that with little kids sometimes. I see parents. The kid is acting normal like all the kids do. And then all of a sudden, she slams her phone on the table and she's like, "Stop doing this. How many times did I tell you?" You can tell right away that this person was on edge the whole time. And then this one little thing just throws you off. If you have that in your life, then maybe you're experiencing stress. Burnout, decreased productivity, increased PMS, slower metabolism, low sex drive, heart attack, stroke, tiredness. If you have a heart attack, that's too late then, right? Tiredness. Have you ever been tired but couldn't sleep? Isn't that like the worst feeling? You're exhausted and you can't fall asleep. Insomnia. Tendency to get second wind in the evening. These are all signs of stress. And these things, they can be dealt with, I believe. One of the things I heard is if you're feeling stressed, you should exercise right away. Well, maybe you don't have an ability to go exercise right away, but I know that when you exercise on a regular basis, that will lower your stress. If I get on a bicycle and if I drive for an hour and a half, I tell you, that just calms me down so much. If I go to the gym and lift weights, or if I do something physical, just relaxes my whole body. So these kinds of symptoms you can handle. But what if there is a deeper source of stress? What if you're living a lie? What if you're not being true to yourself? When we are not true to ourselves, we stress out. We stress out. When I was a kid, and I don't mean when I was a little kid, when I was in my 13, 14 years old, I had this idea where I wanted to go to a naval academy and learn how to sail ships. Be a ship captain. That's what I wanted to do. I love this idea of open ocean and just freedom to go wherever I want to go. That's what I wanted to do. Then I came to the United States. I was 16 years old, and I got dropped out of the high school because I rebelled like many other kids and didn't want to study. And my uncle, the good man that he is, he wanted to help me out. And he says, I just have the right thing for you. You're obviously not very good to go to school. He didn't want to say you're not smart enough. He just said school is not good for you. But I got a friend, and his friend had this. He was a dental tech, the people who make false teeth from gold and from all kinds of materials. And he says, you're going to go in there and you're going to learn this trade, and it pays good, and you can make good money. And it's all true. All of the people that I know in that field are making good money. They have their own business. So I go into this place to start learning how to make false teeth. And I'm in a cubicle all day long. And I am working with these waxes, and I'm working with these models of false teeth, and I'm hating it the whole time. I hated my boss. I hated my uncle. I hated my mother. I hated everybody for making me do their job. Because even though they all meant well, it was for my own good. It wasn't me. It's not what I wanted to do with my life. And I lasted a month on that job. And then I walked up to the boss one day and I said, look, thank you for everything that you did for me, but I quit. I'm just not going to do this. And he was upset there for a while. He says, I went out of my way to help you out. And he did. And he did. But I wasn't happy. It was stressing me out because it wasn't me. Now imagine if I went along with it on account of all of the people who wanted me to do that, to keep them happy. I believe, honestly, that by now I would have been dead. I really believe that. I would have died from a heart attack or something. Because I couldn't live with myself not being what I wanted to be, not being who I was. It would have just caused tremendous amount of stress in my life. The flight or fight response is telling our brain that every situation or problem is a threat to our physical survival. Sometimes we go with this to extremes, right? And sometimes we perceive everything that other people do to us as a threat. That's not healthy either. If somebody just talks to you, your boss, it doesn't mean that they hate you right away if they point out something to you. Sometimes we perceive too many things to be a threat to us. That's not too good. That's not good either. To be true to yourself means to act in accordance with who you are and what you believe. That's what that means. So the stress that we are all having in our lives today, I want to ask you a question. Are you being true to yourself? Are you acting in accordance to what you really are, to who you really are, and to what you really believe? And a lot of people are not. A lot of us people in the United States of America are living a lie. We don't want to say really what's on our mind. We just go along with the flow. We don't want to offend anybody. We don't want to upset anybody. And we are living in this constant mode of not being ourselves, living a lie. Now, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet, and God said to him, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." You all know this story, right? But Jonah ran away from the Lord. Why did he run away? Because the idea of doing what God wanted him to do went against everything that he believed in. It did not resonate with him. It was not himself. He didn't want to do this. It caused him tremendous amount of stress to go to Nineveh and to preach to them. He didn't believe in it. And he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do it. The Bible says here, he ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. Paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. He didn't want to do it. He wanted to stay true to himself. He hated the idea. Everything inside of him rebelled against that idea of going and preaching to these people in Nineveh. Sometimes God asks us to do something that we are not. To be something that who we are not. To go someplace where we don't want to go. Sometimes that's what he does. And in this case, Jonah, he experienced so much stress in just with the idea, that he said, okay, forget it. I'm not going. I'm just not going. Have you ever felt that way? When you're supposed to do something and you just don't want to do it. You hate it. Hate even the concept. And then you know the rest of the story. The Lord sends a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship, and they couldn't get anything done. They were going to die. God asked Jonah to do something that he really did not want to do. And in order to stay true to himself, he refused to do it. And as a result, what happens? In our own case, sometimes we are not true to ourselves. We find ourselves in a job that we hate, yet we put up with it. We find ourselves in a relationship that's not working, yet we put up with it. I heard people say to me in my office, as I'm counseling with them, just about say to me, we hate each other, but the only reason we are staying together is because of the kids. So what kind of a life is that? Sometimes we are practicing the religion that's not genuine. We go to church. We pay the tithe. But it's really not working for us. Yet we put up with it. Yet we just go along with it, year after year after year. Even though their religion is dead and it's not making any difference in our lives. Politics, the same way. We hate it. We hate the things that the government does. We hate the things that they do on the state level. We hate the things that they do on the global level. And yet, year after year, we go and we vote. Even though we know nothing's going to change. And we just live that way. And then one day, what do? Just like Jonah, we quit. We quit the marriage. We quit the church. We quit the politics. We don't vote anymore. We don't go to church anymore. Literally hundreds of thousands of people are leaving churches anymore, all over the United States, including Seventh-day Adventist Church, regardless of what the GC is trying to tell us how great we are doing. Look at this church, 500 members, half empty. And that's the case everywhere you go. Very few are vibrant and healthy. Why? Because we are living a lie and we come to a point where we just want to quit. Don't want to do it no more. Enough is enough. And then comes the fish, right? The big one. He didn't want to do it because it wasn't true to himself. And God puts the situation in place where he finds himself inside of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights, in the belly of a fish. Can you imagine how that smelled in there? Can you imagine that? And sometimes it happens to ourselves too in our own lives. He was in a fish. We find ourselves in a situation that literally totally stinks, right? And we can't get out of it. We cannot get out of it because we did not follow what God wanted us to do, because we wanted to be true to ourselves. And you remember the rest of that story. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. Jonah was in a fish. He finally cries to God, and God says, okay, fine. And that fish literally pukes him out on the shore. And now he's all covered in slime, fish waste, and he has to go and preach. Let me ask you this. How many of you would go listen to a preacher that's covered in fish slime? Now this guy, he goes out there and he preaches, right? He says, okay, fine, I hate it. I hate this idea, but I'm going to do it because it's better to do that than to be inside of a fish. So he goes and he preaches that sermon. And when Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. And then he issued a proclamation, the decree of the king to the nobles and to the whole country. And he said, the king said, this is what he said, do not let people or animals, herds or flocks, taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink, but let people and animals be covered with sackcloth. You know what the sackcloth is? It's a cloth full of ashes. People throw ashes on them as a sign of humility, as a sign of repentance. But let the people and animals be covered with sackcloth. Let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. Who knows? God may yet relent and with compassion turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish. All based on Jonah's sermon, the one that he didn't want to give. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. And Jonah's reaction, but to Jonah this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. Because it wasn't what he wanted to do. And then God said to Jonah, listen to this. Is it right for you to be angry about, you remember? And Jonah says what? I'm angry. I'm angry and I'm going to stay angry. The Bible says it displeased Jonah exceedingly and he became angry. And he even prayed to God and says, this is why I didn't want to come, because I knew that you were not going to kill them. I knew you were going to forgive them. You know what the kicker here is? When Jonah preached that sermon, he became the most effective preacher on the record in the whole of the Bible. There isn't anybody else. You can talk about other sermons, Peter to the 3,000. Jonah literally, when you look at the pure numbers, 120,000 people repented on account of his sermon. So, in my book, he is the single most effective and successful preacher in the history of the Scriptures. And yet he didn't want to do it. What God asked him to do. Sometimes God is asking you and I to do things that we don't want to do. Maybe God is asking you to be yourself today. Maybe God is asking you today to stop pretending. And I think one of the greatest sins that we have in the Seventh-day Adventist Church is that everybody is pretending to be something that they are not. We're living one kind of life inside of the walls of a church and another kind of life outside of the walls of the church. Maybe God just wants you to be who you are. And if you got faults, you got faults. If you got deficiencies, so you got deficiencies. If you got problems, you got problems. If you got anger issues, if you got alcohol issues. By the way, we're going to start AA group here at the church. You know why? Because we got people in the church who drink and who suffer with this disease. So what do? Do we just pretend we are all holy? No. Not here, not in this church. Just be who God made you to be. Be who you are. Come to Him the way you are. Because He covers your deficiencies. Because He takes away your stress. Because sometimes when you choose to do what He's asking you to do, then He comes in and blesses you, and you become more successful than you ever could have become on your own. Jonah didn't even realize how successful he was. It never even occurred to him. It's a tremendous job that he had done with the grace of God. Saved 120,000 people, the whole city. It wasn't just that they were spared from destruction. They repented. They repented from the things that they were doing. God used him tremendously. You know, I believe you ought to be who you are. I believe that the lessons from these stories are that sometimes you got to go with what God has put in front of you. Maybe it even doesn't resonate with you, but sometimes you got to go with it. Be true to yourself, but be also true to God. Make yourself available to God every day. Know when to be true to yourself and know when to be true to God. I believe that we are all individuals. I believe that we are all different. I believe that we all have different gifts. I believe that God made us to be ourselves and to be happy for who we are. And that we should never wish to be somebody else. And that we should never imitate another person. And that we should never not be happy with our station in life. I believe all of those things. I also believe that there are times when God is asking us to do something that we are not comfortable with. And those are the times, if we follow through, those are the times when God is going to make us more successful than anything else that we can do. So that's why I titled this sermon, Less Stress, More Success. Not because I want to give you all kinds of ways how to reduce your stress. You know, I think you can go to a specialist for that, a doctor or somebody. But because I know one thing, I know that God gives success to people who follow His word, who follow His direction. So the question then becomes, what is it that God has been asking you to do in your life and you've been refusing to do it? And every person has something in their life. You start looking into your life, what is it that God has been placing in front of you time after time after time, and you just resent and you recoil and you step back just like Jonah? You don't want to do it, you're not comfortable with it yet. And by doing that, you're denying your own success. By not doing what God is asking us to do, you're denying your own success. Whether it's being faithful in your tithes and offering, whether it's being faithful in your marriage and in your relationships, whether it's being faithful in obeying God in all areas of your life, you know what? We can come up with an excuse for everything and anything in our lives that we do. We can. That's why there is 5,000 Christian religions, because everybody's interpreting the Bible they want to interpret it to justify whatever the heck they are doing. Well, that's not the way I want to live my life. If God put something in front of me, then you know what? Even if I don't like it, I want to do it. Because I know He's going to bless it. And I want to encourage you today as you listen to this sermon, to think about the things in your life that you've been putting aside, that you just kind of been neglecting because you're not comfortable with it. And maybe today is the moment where you say to yourself, you know what, maybe I will go through with it. Maybe I'll go through with that one thing that God wants me to do in my life, whatever that is. For me, it was going to the seminary. I wanted to do all kinds of things with my life. And time after time, God placed in front of me this call to go into the ministry and study theology. And I resented it and I rebelled against it and I wasn't too crazy about it, Finally, I said, okay, I got to do what God wants me to do. And you know what? Let me tell you something. I never, ever regretted it. Never. And it wasn't comfortable. And it wasn't easy. And it wasn't fun. On many occasions. And it was hard and it was difficult. Financially and mentally and spiritually and in all kinds of ways. But I never regretted it. Because when God puts something in front of you, then do it. How many times were you asked to help out here at the church? How many times did we ask people to step up their game as Christians? Just about every Sabbath. Don't we do that just about every Sabbath? As a pastor, and by the way, this is not I'm not chastising anybody. I'm just talking. As a pastor, if I had $1 for every time that somebody says, oh, I would like to, but I just don't have time. If I had $1 for every time I heard that, my goodness, we would be in a new building by now. God bless you, and as you think about this message, and just go with the Lord. Even though it might be stressful for you, just go with Him, and you're not going to regret it. Amen.